My name is Margaret Whitfield, and until recently, I believed I'd raised a family built on respect and love. My son, Daniel, was my pride, thoughtful, kind, steady. When he married Clara, I told anyone who'd listen that she was perfect for him, elegant, ambitious, and fiercely devoted. But perfection, I've learned, can sometimes be the most fragile disguise of all. For years, our home was the gathering place for every celebration. Christmas dinners filled the house with laughter and candlelight. Birthdays were noisy and sweet, wrapped in the scent of vanilla frosting and joy. I watched Daniel and Clara build a life together, and when their son Ethan was born, I thought my heart had reached its fullest capacity for love, but small fractures began to show long before I noticed them. Clara started avoiding eye contact during family visits, her smiles too polished, her compliments too mechanical. Daniel dismissed it as stress, the byproduct of long hours and motherhood's weight. I wanted to believe him, so I did. Love makes fools of us in the kindest ways. When Daniel's work required frequent travel, I began helping more with Ethan, school pickups, homework, the bedtime stories she said she was too tired to read. Ethan adored me once. He'd throw his arms around my waist and tell me I was his safe place. But lately, that sweetness had faded. He'd started pulling away, glancing at his mother before answering even the simplest question. One Thursday evening, I dropped by unannounced with a pot of stew, the way I often did when Daniel was away. Clara answered the door, her phone pressed to her ear, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer a greeting, only stepped aside as if my presence were a mild inconvenience. "Ethan's in the living room," she said, returning to her call, that I found him sitting cross-legged on the floor, building something with plastic blocks. His brow was furrowed, his mouth set in concentration. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. "Can Grandma join?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Mom says you always ruin things." The words stung more than I let on. I reached to hand him a fallen piece, but he slapped it from my palm, eyes flashing. "Don't touch my stuff." Before I could speak, Clara's voice rang out from the doorway. Sharp, mocking, deliberate. "Go on, hit her back if you have the guts." Ethan froze. I stared at her, searching for some hint of misunderstanding. But she only smiled, slow, triumphant, as if she'd been waiting for this moment that I in that brief, suspended silence. I realized something essential had shifted. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a child's rebellion or a mother's poor joke. It was a message, one I didn't yet understand, but would soon have no choice but to confront. The air in that living room thickened until it felt almost unbreathable. Ethan's small hand hovered uncertainly in the air, his chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths. Clara stood behind him, arms folded, watching as though this were a performance she had orchestrated. That I forced my voice to remain calm. "Ethan, sweetheart, Grandma didn't mean to upset you." He glanced at me, confusion flickering across his face before he looked back at his mother, searching for permission. Clara gave a faint nod, subtle but unmistakable. That's when I understood. This wasn't a moment of discipline gone wrong. It was a test. That I rose slowly, my knees aching, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "Clara," I said quietly, "what are you trying to prove?" Her lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm not proving anything, Margaret. I'm just showing Ethan what happens when people pretend to be good but aren't." The words lodged deep. Pretend to be good? What had she told him? Before I could respond, Ethan bolted from the room, leaving the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. Clara turned back to me, her tone shifting into something almost conversational. "You know," she said, "Daniel's been talking a lot lately about honesty. About family secrets." My mouth went dry. "What are you talking about?" She tilted her head, studying me the way one might examine a trapped insect. "Oh, come now. You've built this house on lies. Don't look surprised that it's finally collapsing." For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock, steady, accusing. "You don't know what you're saying," I whispered. She smiled again, softer this time. "Don't I? Maybe I've just read between the lines better than most." Her voice carried a quiet certainty that chilled me. There was something she knew, or thought she knew, and she wanted me to feel the weight of it. "I've given this family everything," I said, more to myself than to her. "Every bit of myself." Clara's eyes gleamed. "And maybe that's the problem, Margaret. You gave too much, to people who weren't yours to give to." The sentence struck like a slap. For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. She lingered in the doorway, letting the silence stretch, then added lightly, "Dinner's getting cold." When she left the room, the sound of her heels faded into the distance, but her words stayed, echoing through the quiet house that I sank into the couch, trembling. Somewhere beneath Clara's venom was truth, twisted, dangerous truth I had buried decades ago. And if she had unearthed it, my son would soon know everything. That night, the house felt colder than it should have. The kind of cold that seeps through walls and into memory. I sat in the dim light of the living room, Clara's words circling in my mind like a haunting refrain. "You gave too much to people who weren't yours to give to." I knew what she was implying. I just didn't know how she could possibly know. Sleep never came. By dawn, I was rummaging through the chest in my bedroom, the one I'd avoided opening for years. Inside were relics from another life. Photographs yellowed with time, a wedding band that no longer fit, and a bundle of letters bound with faded ribbon. My trembling hands found one envelope, its paper soft with age. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Roberts, my late husband's. If Daniel ever learns the truth, he'll hate us both. I stayed because I loved you, but some debts never stop collecting." Reading it again after all these years made my chest tighten. Daniel wasn't Robert's biological son. I had told myself that secret died with my husband, but Clara's cryptic taunts told me otherwise. How had she discovered it? The question consumed me until I drove to their house that afternoon. Clara answered the door with her usual composure, a cup of coffee in one hand, her expression radiant and venomous all at once. "Ah, Margaret," she said. "Finally decided to stop pretending?" I stepped inside without asking. "What have you told Daniel?" She smiled faintly, almost pitying. "Only that families built on lies eventually fall apart. He deserved to know who he really is." My stomach turned. "You told him?" "Not everything," she said, swirling her coffee. "Just enough to make him start asking questions. You know, honesty is contagious." Her cruelty was deliberate, but beneath it, I sensed something else, hurt. She wasn't just punishing me. She was deflecting from her own sins that I tried to steady my voice. "Why are you doing this?" Clara's smile faded. "Because you did it first. You taught me how betrayal looks. Quiet, hidden, dressed as love. I just perfected the art." Her words landed like blows. Before I could respond, Daniel entered the room. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed red. He looked from me to Clara, then back again, and said softly, "Is it true, Mom?" The room fell silent, my throat constricted. I wanted to deny it, to bury it all again, but the time for silence had passed. "Yes," I whispered. "It's true." Daniel's expression crumbled into something between disbelief and sorrow. He turned away without another word, and the door closed behind him with a sound that felt like the end of a lifetime. Clara exhaled, a sound half triumphant, half broken. That I looked at her then and saw not a villain, but a mirror. Both of us had used lies to survive love. Both of us had turned truth into a weapon. And now, we were both bleeding from the wounds we'd inflicted. The days following Daniel's departure blurred into each other, a slow, colorless stretch of silence. The phone didn't ring. The mailbox stayed empty. Even the sound of birds outside my window felt intrusive, as though the world continued without permission. That I had lived with secrets before, but this was different. The first time, silence had been a shield. Now it was a punishment. Every corner of my house reminded me of what I'd lost. The echo of Daniel's laughter, Ethan's tiny footsteps, the warmth of family dinners that once defined my life. When Daniel finally came, it was unannounced. I found him standing on the porch, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, his face drawn and tired. "I didn't come to fight," he said quietly. I nodded. Unable to speak, we sat in the living room, the same space where I had once read him bedtime stories. He stared at his hands, searching for words that refused to form. "I don't know what hurts more," he finally said. "That you lied to me all these years, or that I still love you too much to hate you for it." His voice cracked, and something in me broke with it. "I was weak, Daniel," I admitted. "Your father was gone more than he was home. I was lonely, foolish. I thought I'd ruined everything the moment I found out I was carrying you. But then I saw you, and you were perfect. You were my salvation." Every lie after that was told out of love, not to protect myself, but to protect you. He looked up, his eyes wet but steady. "And Clara?" She wanted to hurt me, I said. But in the end, she only revealed what was already dying. He nodded slowly, the anger in him softening into something closer to sorrow. Ethan deserves better than all this, he murmured. I know, I said. And so do you. For the first time in months, there was peace in his voice, fragile, tentative, but real. He stood to leave, and before walking out, he turned and said, "You're still my mother." That hasn't changed. When the door closed behind him, the house didn't feel so cold anymore. Weeks later, Ethan visited. He didn't mention his mother, nor did I ask. He simply sat beside me, watching the garden sway in the wind. After a long silence, he reached out and took my hand. "Dad says people make mistakes," he said softly. "He says what matters is what they do after." I smiled through tears. Your dad is a wise man. As the afternoon light faded, I realized that forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a choice you make every day, one that keeps your heart from hardening completely. My family isn't what it once was. But maybe that's the point. Maybe truth, once it's spoken, doesn't destroy what's real. It simply burns away what was never meant to last. And in that quiet honesty, I finally felt free. Spring came late that year, as if the earth itself had been reluctant to thaw. I spent most mornings on the back porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching the garden reclaim its color. The roses I'd once planted with Daniel's father had bloomed again, stubborn and bright. Proof, perhaps, that even what's broken can still blossom if given time. Ethan visited often. His laughter, once hesitant, now carried an ease that filled the house with something close to hope. We didn't talk much about the past. Children have a gift for healing through presence, not conversation. When he ran through the yard, chasing sunlight and freedom, I saw echoes of both Daniel and the man I'd loved before, Robert. The tangled threads of my life woven into one boy's smile. One afternoon, as I watched him build a small wooden fort beneath the oak tree, Daniel arrived. He carried a box in his hands, old family photographs I thought he'd thrown away. "I've been going through them," he said, placing the box on the porch table. "Figured we shouldn't let the good memories rot because of a few bad ones." I smiled, surprised by how easily tears found me. "You sound like your father," I said. Daniel hesitated. "Which one?" For a heartbeat, silence hung between us. Heavy, honest, but no longer sharp. "Both," I answered softly. "They each shaped you in ways you'll never fully see. The man who raised you and the man who gave you life, they both gave you parts of themselves. And everything I did, for better or worse, was an attempt to hold the pieces together." He nodded slowly. "Maybe we've all been holding on to broken pieces too long." He joined me on the porch, and for a while, we just sat there, two people who had stopped pretending, who finally understood that love isn't about purity, but persistence. When he left that evening, Ethan ran back for one last hug. "See you Sunday, Grandma," he called out, his voice ringing like forgiveness. After they drove away, I lingered outside, letting the wind comb through my hair. I thought of Clara, somewhere far away, building another version of her life. I didn't hate her anymore. Hatred, I'd learned, only prolongs the lie that we can ever undo what's been done. I went back inside, poured myself a cup of tea, and looked around the quiet house. For the first time in years, it didn't feel empty. It felt honest, stripped of pretense, fragile, but real. The past will always whisper, but it no longer owns me. Family, I've come to realize, isn't defined by blood or secrets. It's defined by who stays when truth burns everything else away. And as the last light faded from the garden, I finally understood. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It teaches you how to live with it.